Hey guys, hopefully you have been working on your questions related to Japan and their modernization. We had talked about Emperor Meiji and how he was confronted by the United States. Okay, and Emperor Meiji was confronted by the United States, and Japan realized they had to modernize, they had to change. Okay, now while Japan was trying to avoid becoming a victim to imperialization, to colonization, to try to prevent themselves from being exploited. You had China right across the body of water there, the China Sea and parts of the Pacific there, right across from them, who were dealing with the same problem. Asian nations were technologically not up to par with Western nations, and China is going to have really an interesting story of their own. All right, so late 1800s, remember, we got a lot going on in late 1800s. You got Europe, countries are unifying together, building a sense of nationalism. There's industrialization. You're going to see the same thing. We'll talk about the United States soon and their issues. And then you have Japan, who's trying to play catch up and modernize and become like the Western nations. And at the same time, you have China, okay? And China, like Japan, had resisted change in a lot of ways. And China, first thing we want to mention about them is that they had been ruled by a family dynasty for thousands of years. Okay, China had been ruled by various family dynasties for quite some time. There was an emperor, and in this case, in the late 1800s, there was an empress. You see the right here that China is ruled by this empress. Her name is Cixi, okay? And numbers two and three kind of go together here. Empress Cixi, and yes, you spell it Cixi, okay? Empress Cixi does not want to become a modern nation. She and her people essentially, they don't want to modernize. They don't want to change, okay? And that's going to be a problem because Empress Cixi is in a bad way here. Western nations, want to exploit China. And the strange thing is that there's a phrase that the United States came up with that European nations were A-OK with. There was a reference to China as there was an open door policy, meaning that everybody from the West could come in and exploit the resources from China. Uh, and that's absolutely bizarre to even think about. Okay. Now, Empress Cixi, here's the problem that she's in. If she tries to stand up to these European nations and the United States and kick them out of China, essentially she's going to get kicked out of power. Okay. And she realizes this, so she allows these European nations and the United States to come in there and take their resources. And basically, they had made a deal with her that, hey, we'll let you stay in power as long as you don't try to stop us from exploiting your country. All right. That is not something that is going to be okay. All right. And here's what happens with Empress Cixi. All right. Empress Cixi, eventually the people start to get frustrated because these outsiders are coming in, taking their resources, treating the area poorly, and there's no accountability for them. And so, strangely enough, right around 1900, a group of martial artists, uh, and I'm not making this up either, okay? I'm talking about legit kung fu warrior type people. They called themselves, and here's a picture of some of them. They called themselves the Sons of the Harmonious Fist. All right, and these guys, they number in the thousands, and you can see that they're armed with traditional weapons, spears, swords. They do know various martial arts such as kung fu, and because they believed in the traditional ways of China, all right, these Sons of the Harmonious Fist want to see Westerners kicked out of the nation. And so they're like, hey, if Empress Cixi won't do it, we'll do it for her. All right. And this results in something called the Boxer Rebellion. All right. They called them the Boxers because essentially that's what we equated it to, people kicking and punching. And so people just naturally thought of boxing. All right. These Chinese martial artists, we call them the Boxers, They rebel and they start attacking Westerners. Any individuals or businesses who were exploiting China for their resources, uh, the Boxers attack them, and they actually kill several Westerners in the process. And of course, this draws a response from European nations in the United States. European nations and the United States send in segments of their military. For example, the United States sends in a detachment of the Marines to put down these Boxers. Fun fact too: these martial artists, they thought they could stand up to modern weapons and that they would be somehow invincible and be able to absorb the bullets, or that they wouldn't hurt them. It turns out they were wrong. Okay, the Boxer Rebellion is put down pretty quickly. All right, no disrespect to Kung Fu, but a good bullet is very effective at killing people. Now, here's the importance from this, okay? The Boxer Rebellion, the fact that the United States has to send the Marines and every other nation has to send their military in to deal with this problem, makes these countries question Empress Cixi, okay? And Empress Cixi, she panics, all right? And she's going to be the last dynasty ruler because she flees the country. She abdicates. If you don't know, abdicate means you just get out, you leave. All right. She abdicates and leaves China. Okay. There's literally no one in charge of China. The empress is gone and the nation is going to struggle. They're going to fall apart. Oh no. All right. Now, I want to show you this cartoon here for a second, too. This particular cartoon shows you how the other nations of the world, the modern nations, are going to treat China. And you can see there are a number of figures here, and they're carving up the Chinese. Okay, so you see them carving up the Chinese, and there's a couple things you want to note. First of all, the individuals all represent a country. All right. Now, take a look on the left, the lower left there. You see an old lady with a knife with all her jewelry and everything. If you guessed that this is supposed to be Queen Victoria, you are correct. Now, notice she's eyeball to eyeball with who? Okay? And if you didn't guess it, it's the German Kaiser. Remember, these two countries are big time rivals, and Germany wants to be where Great Britain is, the top dog. All right? And now you look next to the German guy and you see a Russian. That's supposed to be there. We haven't talked about him yet, but Tsar Nicholas II, who's in charge of Russia, he's there interested in carving up the Chinese. And right behind him, you see Lady Liberty. That's America. America is getting in on the action too. Now, something that's really interesting, you also see the Japanese here at the table. Okay? Even though we haven't talked about it specifically in class, you should have learned essentially from the article I gave you that the Japanese are going to earn a measure of respect by the fact that they modernize. The other nations of the world have to treat them as somewhat of an equal, and you can see that in this cartoon. You see that the Japanese there are seen as serious. They got a serious face. They're looking for their piece of China, and they're all exploiting it. And in the background, take a look at how they portray the Chinese as this crazy-looking guy with a strange face, exaggerated features, including the long fingernails, the long hair coming out of the back. That he is seen as not nearly as contemplative or as serious as the Japanese guy. Okay, so ultimately, this is about a cartoon about exploitation. Everybody's now going to try to get their piece of China because China, the empress, has left, and they've already been exploiting the country. So they're like, hey, we might as well just continue on with business. We don't really care. Okay, now here's the problem, and there's a guy I want you to remember along the way. As the nation's falling apart in China, um, there is one individual who wants to try to better China and make a change, and his name is Sun Yat-sen. Okay, Sun Yat-sen. Here is a picture of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, and this man tries to establish a democracy in China. All right, and it's not going to go well for him because the country was way too weak at the time. Uh, they were being exploited by outsiders, and it was not the right time to set up a democracy. But he tries really hard, bless his heart, and he is going to be kind of revered in China, and we'll mention him later on because He will die in the 1920s, but he's still going to be relevant decades later. All right, now, since there's no real leadership anymore, here's what's bizarre about China. And you see this map of China here, okay? And it's got all these blobs on it. All right, now here's where this is interesting. Since there's no stable government in China, the empress has fled, Sun Yat sen is not able to set up a democracy. What happens is China is that it becomes like gang territory, okay? Each of these blobs represents like a little bit of turf, like a little region, almost like a little state within China. And each one of them is ruled just by some local warlord. And a warlord is just a nice way of saying a gang leader. All right. And China, from 1900 all the way up until nearly 1950, for almost 50 years, it's ruled by these little regional warlords. Okay. And the rest of the world doesn't care. All right. The United States, European nations, Japan, they're like, hey, as long as you little warlords don't try to interrupt us from exploiting China, then ultimately we'll let you have your little turf. Just don't get in our way. Right? So China goes from having this empress, this old way of doing things, and it's broken down now because the empress has fled, and you got these little regions who you have these little gang leaders defending their turf, and Western nations and Japan are like, hey, just don't get in our way. We all want our little section to exploit and take the resources from, right? And so that's what China is doing. Now, it's interesting. They are in a completely backwards way of doing things than the Japanese. The Chinese never wanted to modernize, and they went from having one strong central leader to being broken up into these little warlords, and they're exploited by the West. Right? The Japanese go from that feudalistic system where they are, remember, they were ruled by the emperor, the shogun, and the daimyo, and they modernize and they create a more central government where they adopt the ways of the West and they become unified as one nation. Right? So China and Japan are going separate ways. Japan is on the rise, excuse me, and China is on the decline, and they're going to struggle. All right. Now let's move along and talk about the United States. Okay. Now, once again, we're talking about the late 1800s here, and some things will be familiar to you, and some things not so much. All right. America's history, and we're going through a couple of things really fast because there's no time to talk about things you've already learned about. In the 1860s and 1870s, remember, the United States is going through the Civil War and Reconstruction. All right. We struggled to maintain our identity as a nation because of the Civil War and Reconstruction, that time period where we're trying to repair old wounds. Uh, that essentially causes some angst in the United States. All right. But after the Civil War and Reconstruction, America moves into a different era, an era called the Gilded Age. Okay. And gilded is an old word. You may not know it. Okay. But gilded is a word that means something is covered in gold or plated in gold. All right. And they call it the Gilded Age for a reason. Okay. If something is covered in gold or plated in gold, you look at it and you think it's absolutely amazing. But the reality is that it's only gold on the outside. On the inside, it can be something terrible and different. And the Gilded Age is a perfect explanation for that. Because on the outside, the Gilded Age, there's going to be a lot of economic development in the United States. Okay. Um, but on the inside, there are some terrible problems. All right. So let's talk about the economic development. Like the rest of the world, the United States is industrializing. All right, take a look at this graphic here. On the left, it shows you the bottom on the horizontal axis, you see 1800. And if you look at 1800, it says percentage of the U.S. workforce. And if you stay literally on the year 1800 and go up, it's like nearly 90% of Americans are involved in agriculture in some way. Okay, that's how significant agriculture is. Now, fast forward to the year 1900, all right, and look at how few people are involved in agriculture, and then take a look at the percentage of people involved in industry and services. Industry, think of producing things, factory. Services, like for example, a hotel offers a service, all right? A food place, a restaurant offers a service, all right? So you can see that America is changing here. We're not agriculturally based anymore. We're largely industrial and service based. And here's what's really interesting. You look at it now, and human beings now, past the year 2000 into modern era, we're largely service and industry and very little in agriculture. All right. A lot of the agriculture today is actually done by machines. All right. So let's take a look at some other interesting information. Okay. We're industrializing, and remember, that means that we need factories. We use machines to do the work traditionally done by man. Okay. And factory work is powered by immigrants. In the Gilded Age, you're going to see a huge number of people come to the United States. All right. And this shows you what types of people are coming. Now, you see on the left from 1860 to 1900, okay, that largely our immigrants are British and German, all right? And we liked those immigrants, the ones that are from Western Europe, because they are more prone to knowing or learning English. They're likely to be educated, and their culture is probably more similar to the United States. All right, same thing, the Irish are the third largest there. So we wanted those people, all right? But when machine work, when industry starts to take off, we needed more and more immigrants. And so we started encouraging people from other places to come. And look at the change from 1900 to 1920. You have Italians, the people from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Russia and its surrounding states. All right. And those are going to make up a huge portion, well over half the immigrants that are coming in. And those immigrants are not people who are educated. They're less likely to know or learn the language. And we use them for a simple laborers. That's it. People who had to come in and do jobs that Americans either couldn't do, wouldn't do, or wouldn't take pay for. All right. So here's the thing, the Gilded Age, there's going to be a lot of money made. All right. And there's going to be a lot of factory work and hard labor, but it's going to be done largely by immigrants. All right. Now, the labor force, you can see this changes again. Something that's significant, we want to show you that there are a huge number of workers, increase in workers. Look at 1870. The labor force, the amount of people working in the United States is just a tick under 13 million. And that number in 40 years more than triples. Okay? And you see that manufacturing and construction are the is the big chunk of what's going on, and you can see the decrease in agriculture, right? But the key figure from that is the number of people that are working. And if we have more and more laborers, that means we need immigrants. It's not that people liked immigrants. There was some serious anti-immigrant sentiment at the time, but they're like, hey, we need people to work and do jobs that other people may not want to do. So we were constantly encouraging immigration. Okay. Interestingly enough, at the base of the Statue of Liberty, which is built in this time period, you get a poem from Emma Lazarus, who, this is not the entire poem, but she wrote a poem about immigrants and how America is willing to take people. And the phrase in here, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Um, Ultimately, that section of the New Colossus is placed at the base of the Statue of Liberty. And we accept immigrants all the time. And people are willing to come here because in Europe they're struggling. All right. And notice it calls them your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. In Europe, there was a serious struggle with population density and providing work for everybody. So there was a huge exodus. People were leaving Europe to get out of that situation. So America needs immigrants, they need workers, and people are willing to come to the United States because there is more room there. There's a potential for growth, and they see it as this land of opportunity. It's better than their home. Okay? Now, Something else that changes with industrialization, all right? The change is from urban and rural a population, right? Look at this from the United States here. The total population is going to take off. Look at the change between 1880 and 1920. The American population more than doubles, all right? It goes from 50 million to 100 million. And the strange thing is that people are not living in urban areas. 1920 is an important year. It's the first time that more people were living in cities than they were living in rural areas. Right? Why are they going to the cities? The number one reason, that's where the jobs are. Right? Same thing today. In case you're wondering, I think the split now is like it's over 80% urban, people living in cities. And we still need the rural areas for a lot of reasons, but people want to go to the cities because that's where not only the jobs are, but they also like the fact that there are more amenities. You all would call those things to do, modern stuff, all right? Things you can't do out in Salt Rock, okay? Now, the last thing we'll mention today, and we'll get into more about the dangers of industrialization, the work conditions of the United States were absolutely dreadful in most cases. Here you see a picture of child labor. Um, we talked about this before, the dangers of industrialization. People had no qualms about using child labor and exploiting workers, and the conditions are in most factories are absolutely terrible. It is not considered a big deal if somebody gets hurt on the job because you could simply replace them. All right. There's another immigrant who's ready to take a job if you can't or won't do it. We use children to do the jobs that other people couldn't do. Children are sometimes brave in ways that adults are not because children never see the danger in particular work. All right. We'll talk more about the working conditions tomorrow, and specifically, we will look at the meat packing industry in the United States, and there's a reason why. So we'll pick up with that tomorrow. I hope you guys are doing okay.